Hello, Michael.
Hi, Lorri. How are you?
Well, thank you. How are you?
Well, thanks.
That's good. The last day of summer today.
Yes, and the leap day as well, if we can call it that.
Yes. So that's fairly wonderful. I don't know if you've noticed, but last week in the media, the Grattan report introduced the reading guarantee and of course quite a furor in the education sector. And if you agree, today I'd like to spend some time talking to you about it and unpacking it from our varying perspectives.
Yeah, Lorri, look, it has been a while since we made a podcast like this one, but I just think the scale and the importance of this report does warrant a chat. I agree with you. And I think it's good for us to be able to help teachers and educationalists kind of wade their way through this very complex report, because if they can get a handle on it, it may be able to help inform their practice. Because I think we can all agree that teaching reading is our core business, isn't it?
Certainly, and I know that a lot of people are talking about this report at the moment, so we want to get in there into the conversations like we always try to. I know I was asked to respond to the primary English teachers, had a survey about what we thought about the Grattan report, which I responded to, but I just thought I'd like to get your perspective as well as my writing and work partner, because we have varying perspectives about things because of our backgrounds.
That's true, Lorri. You and I are an interesting combination, aren't we? You're a teacher with a special education background who has spent your career in public schools teaching reading in various
And a
ways.
researcher.
And a researcher, that's true. And I'm a CEO English in the New South Wales public education system. But before that, a high school teacher, and also had a stint teaching K to 12. Teaching reading's been our core business for some time, and it continues to be a focus of our work.
Certainly does, and it's a pleasure, isn't it? Every day.
It is, yeah.
But before we get going, let's share our screen and do our acknowledgement before we move any further into this interesting topic today.
Sure.
So let's move to our next slide. I'm just looking for our next button to press our next slide, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
It's not visible. Oh, yes, it is. Sorry, we've forgotten, haven't we?
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on.
Sure. So grateful to the First Nations people who have cared for these lands in which we meet today for many thousands of years. I'm on Gadigal land of the Eora Nation.
And I'm on the Wanneroo lands in the Hunter Valley, New South Wales. And if there are any other Aboriginal groups we should acknowledge, please write in the chat.
And we'd like to pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to the elders of the future now sitting in our classrooms. We acknowledge the First Nations people as traditional custodians of the many lands in which we meet across this virtual community of practice, and extend that respect to Aboriginal people present.
Thank you, Michael. And my idea about where to start is to clarify what is the Grattan Institute. Some people may not be aware.
And by asking this question, Lorri, are you clarifying the significance and outlining the status of this mammoth report?
I suppose I am, but it's bigger than that, Michael. Just like when we get a new book in our work, we look at audience and purpose, and that's where I start whenever I look at these reports. What's the audience and what's the purpose? So I found out that the Grattan Institute is a public policy think tank established in 2009 in Melbourne, and it's not aligned to any political party, so that's important. But it's part funded by the Australian government, the Victorian government, the University of Melbourne and BHP, surprisingly. It addresses 6 areas, but today we're just talking about one area, education, because that's our core business. And the person who heads the education portfolio was Jordana Hunter. She's the co-author of this report. She's the main researcher. And from the website, I did not discern whether she's a teacher and researcher or just a researcher with a specialisation in education. And I think that's important as we get into the report today to say that up front.
Mm-hmm. Yes, as I've been perusing their website, Lorri, I noticed the key word here is recommendations.
Yeah.
Grattan reports recommend lots of things to the Australian government for the betterment of our society, but I don't recall some of the recommendations being followed. For example, how we should get behind hydrogen as an alternative energy source, getting people on board with vaccinations, fixing local roads. I live in Newtown and my local road is actually the width of a car track left over from the last century.
It certainly is. I'm afraid to leave my new car near your house, Michael, in case somebody sideswipes me.
Fair enough. And so with the best of intentions and a plethora of important research backing up findings, recommendations from these reports are not always taken on board, it seems.
That's interesting. And continuing our cart analogy about Newtown, the topic of this report has upset the apple carts of many people, seemingly, because we're all experts on teaching reading. After all, we've all been to school.
How true. So what's the main message behind the report, Lorri?
It's right up there at the get-go on the report, and I've written it on our slide so you can see it.
Yeah.
Australia has a reading problem. A third of our children can't read well, and we need to transform the way we teach reading in schools. And here's how to do it. That's a big claim, isn't it?
It is actually. I thought it was interesting the report doesn't specifically target early reading acquisition. Is that right?
Oh, it doesn't, I think, Michael. It starts with the need for a strong focus on phonics that we've been hearing for a while in the early years and early identification of reading problems. But then it moves to the importance of Year 7 screening and then how 81.3% of Year 9 students do not meet minimum standards in NAPLAN reading. I wasn't laughing because of the stat, I was laughing because of the 0.3% of a child.
Yeah.
So in total, the report spans most years of schooling.
Yes, look, as a secondary teacher, I was particularly interested to notice that Year 9 boys are in fact a year behind girls. So the gender reading gap is larger in Australia than most other countries. Also, what bothered me was the statement about the achievement gap and how it widens over time due to continual layering of new knowledge and skills.
Yeah, that's a real worry, isn't it? And that's related to the Matthew effect, a Matthew's effect, because there's more than one, a reference to the Bible describing how students who fail to master decoding early read fewer words than their peers, they have less exposure, limited vocabulary, the cycle continues, less enjoyment of reading, less time practicing, and then the gap widens. The bottom line is it's crucial to learn to read in the primary years.
Yeah, that's right. And if not, there's a danger that the job to help students struggling to catch up can become overwhelming for secondary teachers who are often not well trained in this area, as we know. But Lorri,
Yes.
I've read some other important research relates to this particular issue by Larson and Little just last year that disparages the Matthew effect. It actually found evidence, this study, that there was compensatory growth for students starting with below average NAPLAN reading results across New South Wales and Victoria. So this was well over 70,000 students. In fact, these students made more progress than students starting with above average NAPLAN results. So it seems that students behind in primary can catch up in secondary. Has our education system been so focused on a back to basics approach that we've forgotten about our more able students? I mention this just to show that the Grattan report is not the final word in this issue. Significantly, the contrary research was not referenced in the Grattan report.
You're asking us to think more broadly, aren't you, Michael? Yeah, that's a good point.
I think we need to look critically at research when it comes our way.
And we're trying to do that today, aren't we?
Yeah, we are for sure. Anyway, let's put that aside for now and just work through the main ideas of the report and their implications for teachers.
Good idea. It begins with an overview stating there's a need for all states and systems to get on board on the same page, read how they teach reading. The words evidence-based practice underpins all the theory outlined in the report, aligned with the science of reading body of research.
I know the report advocates the importance of phonics in line with the National Reading Panel report of 2000 and other key research papers that come from around the world. These reports mostly underpin the way reading is now taught. The report advocates all schools now need to get on board.
But I was pleased to read about the importance of a knowledge-rich curriculum, possible evidence for integrating learning across the KLAs as we do in our unit work. Two texts that I've read on this topic recently of the importance for integrating learning across the KLAs. And these are on the screen for you. First of all, The Knowledge Gap by Natalie Wexler. And the second one, When Can You Trust the Experts? Wexler's text is not cited in this Grattan report. However, the ideas presented in the reading guarantee are so similar to those put forward in this text. I really noticed it. The Willingham text, The Knowledge Gap, asks us to be critical when selecting tools for reading teaching and base decisions on solid science, and that's exactly what the report says. While some of the programs are rooted in solid science, the research behind many others is grossly exaggerated, and that's Willingham's report from a number of years ago. When Can You Trust the Evidence? This book by Daniel Willingham helps everyday teachers and administrators separate, and I was trying to think of an Australian version of this, the wheat from the chaff, to determine which new educational approaches are scientifically supported and worth adopting.
Yes, look, I noticed both those very interesting books not actually cited in the report, but they both sound like they're well worth a read.
And that idea of knowledge is important. Yeah. So the report advocates a structured literacy approach and a multi-tiered system of support. By a structured literacy approach, they mean a program based on the cognitive science outlining the key sub-skills of teaching reading, the big six: oral language, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocab and comprehension, starting with simple consonants and vowel sounds and combinations, students learning sequentially with increasingly complex concepts introduced and practiced over time. A synthetic, systematic program sequence or program is advocated. Quite clearly.
And the diagram, Lorri, describes what a multi-layered system of support might look like. So at the top of the triangle, you can see, or the pyramid, if you like, there's a tier 3, which refers to the 5% of students who are probably going to need one-on-one support, such as, I don't know, experts in students' sound production, speech pathologists, that kind of thing.
Michael, I provide one-on-one support as a support teacher learning assistance in primary schools, individualised programming for students that had big gaps in their learning.
Yeah.
That's an example for you.
It's an expensive thing, but of course, some students are going to need that. And then there's another 15% of students that will need to fit into tier 2, which is small group tuition. And they're recommending, I noticed in the report, 5 people maximum, 5 students maximum in these groups. The other 80% of students are basically in this sort of general group at the bottom of the pyramid, and they're the ones that hopefully just going to get quality instruction, high quality instruction. We hope that for all our students, of course. I thought it was interesting that in the report, in the examples they gave at the primary school, for example, that we're going to look at soon, students were not taken out of class for the tier 3 and tier 2 groups, but rather they operated outside of the learning. So all the students, 100%, worked together with the teacher in the classroom, and then at another time in the timetable, they were managed to find a space for these groups, the one-on-one tier 3 group and the small group tuition to be operating.
What about, where does that sit with the specialist who is team teaching with the class teacher?
Well, that's a really interesting point. They're using a withdrawal model here, and I think it worked because they were able to run the tiered tier 3 and tier 2 at the same time they were running LOTE in the school for other students. So those students missed out on LOTE. I'm not quite sure what the repercussions of that are, but I can see that the school may have felt there wasn't a reason to prioritise for those students. But of course, it's not the only model. The other model is for the student to actually come into the classroom and work with students.
And as a special education teacher, that was always my preferred model, so they didn't miss out all that incidental learning that happened in the classroom.
Mine too,
Yeah.
Lorri.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
I'm sorry that my head's in the middle of your tear picture. I can't move it. I'm trying to put you.
That's
So
okay.
throughout, yeah, I can't do much about it, sorry. But throughout the report continues to reinforce that the whole language approach is not recommended, as it does not result in all students learning to read, most but not all. Predictable and level texts are not recommended, neither are the 3 queuing system. These are huge changes. Decodable texts are advocated to practice emerging phonics skills and decoding.
Yeah, that last point's interesting, isn't it? Principals need
certainly.
reliable advice on what works. That's the important thing here. There's a clear warning to principals to ensure that the professional learning that they choose for their teachers, chosen perhaps from the external providers, coheres with evidence-informed practice. This has implications for professional teacher associations, as well as people like us, Lorri.
That's on page 32 if they want evidence that that's true, that that's in their report.
Yeah. The Tier 3 model is put forward as a means of tackling underachievement through a response to an intervention model. Small group catch-up tutoring can reduce learning gaps. I was involved in COVID
That's
tutoring
right. Yes.
at a school very close to me, a K-12 school, in fact, although I was working mainly with secondary. And what happened in that particular case was I actually went into the classroom to work with teachers so that students were not missing out in their lessons, and students, particularly secondary students, I felt weren't being feeling like they were being picked on or targeted in some way. I was able just to move into the classroom and just blend in and help all kinds of students, but in the process made sure I actually caught up with those that were in particular need. So I think it is good to be aware that there are models that could be working in this approach.
Yeah, that's good. And the report also says a lot about instructional literacy specialists and specialist teachers working with teachers in class to hone teacher skills in terms of professional learning, as well, a need to have a greater focus on early literacy in undergraduate and university programs, build in the expertise of the teaching workforce and the future workforce. That's important. So the first case study was Churchill Primary School, and Churchill is a public school in Daylesford, that beautiful area of Victoria that we all love, with all the beautiful water to taste. They took on an Orton Gillingham approach, and that approach is almost 80 years old. And when you and I planned this presentation, you said, why are you showing these texts that are rooted in 80 years of educational directions? And I said, because that's the training that the teachers at Churchill do to change around their practice. And I actually, a couple of years ago, when the science of reading was a big thing, when the science of reading research came out, I bought all of these texts so I would understand and have a historical perspective of how reading's been taught. And I'm just including a little bit of this today, Michael, because it helps us understand where we've come from, and we really have turned around a lot, and come back to these things. So last year there was this, I think it was Four Corners report on the angry farmer, and I haven't put the video in here. I've just done a screenshot. And this farmer was angry because he was a busy man on his farm, and one of his children weren't learning to read at school, and it was a whole language approach. So he picked up, I don't know if he had this book, but he picked up the Orton Gillingham approach and taught his child to read explicitly and systematically through phonics. So he went to the Tasmanian state government and put a petition in and said, my child didn't learn to read by the way the schools are teaching reading. Why isn't the school focusing on things that work? And it was a huge uproar. And that brought in, that state government went back to the science of reading research. So that's why I put that in today.
Yeah, sure, go on.
I was just going to say they were using Lucy Corkin's Reader's Workshop model. Lucy Corkin has lovely things in terms of writing and teaching reading and writing, but it wasn't specific enough in terms of teaching phonics. It wasn't explicit and systematic. Critics said it was not explicit enough for the introduction of synthetic systematic phonics, They used the 3 cueing system, visualising, and lots of independent reading time. But that's a bit hard if a kid can't read, to have independent reading. And they had reading recovery. In 2017, this school, Churchill Primary School, moved to an Orton-Gillingham approach. Straight from these texts, it's a shame I've got a lot of books to show you. So anyway, I'll just tell you what they are. Teachers were trained in the method. The school bought decodable texts, developed its own detailed scope and sequence. It was a huge shift in teaching practice for all the staff at considerable expense. NAPLAN results in the interim show the results have significantly improved. Yeah, now I just want to say a bit about why Johnny can't read, how it's got on the screen. The text was written in 1955, very famous. There's all these send-ups about why Johnny can't write, why Johnny can't do this, can't do that, which gets it's become humorous over time. But Johnny had not been instructed using phonics, which teaches children how to sound out or decode words. Once Johnny was introduced to phonics, he began to excel at reading. And Michael's question to me was, Lorri, why are we looking at a 74-year-old report that focuses on the experience of one student? Did I answer that question well, Michael?
I think you did.
Thanks.
And I thought,
It's an important one.
yeah. But look, I think there's another important point here from the report too, that there's strong message for educators to trust and act on parental concerns and don't let kids quietly slip under the radar.
And that gets us back to our comment that we made earlier about everybody thinks they're experts in teaching reading because they can all read, or most people can read, or they've all learned to read at school. So they believe that they know what happens, and also parents know their kids better than anybody else. So if there's an issue, we have to be respectful to listen to them and investigate it clearly. And this angry farmer felt that he wasn't listened to, and that's where it ended up in Parliament. So there's a message for all of us. Did you want to say anything more about that, Michael?
No, I think that's good.
Okay. Now we're going to have a little bit of another trip through history here, just for a minute. I wanted to know. Pardon? Taking you back?
Taking me back. I remember these books from my upbringing. I'm sure.
That's great. I wanted to know more about the history of phonics teaching in education, which led to Haywingo. Orton-Gillingham instructional training. Start with vowels. Add a few choice consonants so children can read words early on. Same thinking as today, but there's a slightly different order. A phoneme grapheme introduction. For example, a lot of schools do phonics programs based on SATPIN, at, and then kids can read from the first week or so of school. Whereas in Haywingo, they introduced the vowels first. So I thought that was interesting. Now there was a program booklet. Now you can't see this, and I'm sorry I haven't put them all up. You can see the program booklet on the screen. But there's also a student booklet that I've made a picture of as well. No, can't get it. So that's that philosophy about, you've got the teacher program and you've got the kid book. And here's something from Haywingo inside the student book. And it's an excerpt from that booklet, and the booklet comes from the USA. I looked up where, or you can see where on screen. And we've got our CBC blending here, some, sip, sod, some. We do that as well with our whiteboards today and with our letters, just the same. And then we've got some sentences made up with those words, CBC blending. And then we've got consonant vowel blending, and then we've got consonant vowel consonant blending. So there's exactly the sort of things that we do in classrooms today. I thought that was interesting when it came out of the Haywingo workbook.
Yeah.
This is an example of what we did in the system where I worked in 2018. Every teacher in our system was trained in early reading, and they weren't given a program, as this report told us to be suggested a number of programs. They were trained in how you can make sense of teaching phonics. And the book that we were supplied with was this book, Beck and Beck. You can't see it. And it's called Making Sense of Phonics. And this is all the schools that I was working in at the time. They made these word, what do they call them? They're in the back, word pockets. And they had their vowels and consonants that they'd that they'd been introduced to. And they had to make words in the word pockets. And they had to write the words because of that important link between learning to read and learning to write. Started from the get-go. That wasn't mentioned in the report, Michael, and that was a concern to me.
Mhm. So I gleaned from what you're saying, Lorri, that links to curriculum are not really evident in the Grattan report.
I only saw it a couple of times based on the curriculum and how the curriculum is different in Victoria and New South Wales to the rest of Australia. That was the only mention that I recall, and I read it very closely a number of times. Yeah.
Yeah, look, so there are differences. The recommendation from the report to the Australian government is that we should all be on the same page regarding teaching reading based on the evidence. The problem here, of course, is that the Australian government has no jurisdiction over education in the states. I felt the summaries, however, of each of the state education systems, the way they teach reading, was important and interesting. Some of the practices mentioned in the report were named and shamed, raising awareness of recommended teaching practices. That's on page 41 in the report. Similarly, some education systems are given a heads up in the report as to the use of the science of reading in their early reading practices. I'm also going to not mention the names of those particular organisations, but they're clearly stated for people to read should they wish.
But the big picture message, Michael, wasn't it, is we all need to be on the same page for how we teach reading based on the best evidence that we've got.
Yes, that came through loud and clear to me too. We need to all use the implementation science to help close the research practice gap, more than a light touch implementation. I think that's the point here. The question arises, how can the Australian government, however, set the agenda for state-based education?
Yeah, such a good question and such an important one that needs to be asked at this time.
Yep.
So this was out of the report, this was the scope and sequence for Churchill Primary School's phonics, as well as morphology, irregular words and spelling, blah, 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 grade 1, term 2. I thought, oh yeah, that's interesting. That's, very explicit and systematic. And then I went back to this text that I used. I'm 64, Michael. You can't see the book, but I've got it on the screen in the next slide. And I had a look at the scope and sequence in this book in my year 1. Look at this.
Okay.
And in terms of learning intentions and success criteria, when I finished something, I had to colour it in if I think I knew it. So that's sort of like a step further than what we saw at Churchill. I thought that was amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, we really are back to basics. That whole thing. That's what it is, and that's where it came from. And I actually contacted the department that I work for to ask them when this book, We Look at Words, will stop being used in our system, because there was no date inside it. And they said that it's been in schools for a long time and people chose to use it or not use it at their leisure, and they have no idea when it stopped being used. I don't know anybody that uses it now. But this was the student workbook, and they had a reader as well that goes with it. And I've got a picture of that on the next page for us. I think that's interesting and relevant, Michael, do you?
I think it is, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And this is just inside the We Look at Words books. You can see consonant blends, see word building activities, identifying initial sounds. You can see a little story using those sounds. Yeah. All the things we do today, same way.
Lorri, I note reading and writing are taught consecutively using these partner resources. And they are reciprocal processes after all. And the student writing is very good for year 1, I think anyway. That's something I noted reading the reading guarantee. There is no acknowledgement of the reciprocity of learning to read and learning to write and how it benefits students to learn them together. Indeed, one problematic aspect of the push to improve reading exclusively is this: if we focus on reading, what happens to writing and other literacy skills?
I agree, and we see the problems with writing as we progress through the grades. And if we look at reading in isolation, that exacerbates that issue in my view. So in terms of this reader, and comparing that to the predictable text that we use in kindergarten and year 1 and year 2 now, there's lots of repetition. There's a heavy reliance on picture cues, so that would be frowned upon. However, I do have a number of phonics decodables here today, and they all have a heavy reliance on picture cues too, so I don't think we can make generalisations about that. This reader is not suitable throughout the lens of the reading guarantee due to the picture cues, and students may guess the text rather than read the words on the page. And that's stated a lot.
Lorri, I can't believe how gendered the text is.
I know.
Look at
That's
those
amazing.
Wow.
I know. It gets worse, Michael. That was just one page. I knew you'd say that. I just knew. My point here, as early as when I was in year 1, reading and writing was taught in partnership. Your comment just then. They were a double-edged sword, 2 sides of a coin. I didn't see evidence of this in Churchill's scope and sequence, but also in the report more broadly, which was a concern.
I noticed, Lorri, too, that they tended to compartmentalise the different aspects of literacy learning, and it wasn't actually integrated with a holistic look at English as a subject. Maybe it was happening elsewhere in the kids' learning, but it certainly wasn't evidence in the scope and sequence I saw.
That's a good point. So what's this about, Michael?
Okay, so this is a useful table, which I think relates to the secondary side of things. And it lists the survey responses from teachers, secondary teachers and school leaders about what schools need to consider and discuss in relation to their reading practices. And I guess an important question is what information can schools glean from this data?
And they should really look at what's happening in their school in relation to those issues, shouldn't they, really? That is how I suspect it would be useful. And
look, some of them are going to be difficult for schools to control, like lack of available staff, for example.
Yes.
Lack of staff experience in the teaching of literacy. You know, schools basically deal with what they're dealt.
The hard one, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Because everybody wants to do the best that they can.
Yep.
And there's another slide like that too that we put in for a good reason. This is a summary slide, but it gives advice to Australian government and Catholics and independent schools how to commit to what's in the report in terms of a 6-step reading guarantee. It's a useful starting point for schools to begin the discussion in their schools at both a systems and a local level. So people might see this report and think, oh, so big, what do I do to get started? They've tried to help by providing this guide.
Okay, so here's the final call to action to governments and school systems, obviously with that aim of getting everyone on the same page.
And I just wanted to go through some of these pictures. This is my niece reading her decodable text, term 3, year 1. And you can see there certainly are picture cues, aren't there? So I won't say anything about the type of decodable text, but it's a very popular one in schools. So this is a little story I know we always remember the narratives, don't we?
We do.
This is an email that I sent to Jordana Hunter, who is the key researcher of this report. And it was in relation to running records, because I use running records in my work as a quick assessment tool, 1-minute read to see whether that student needs help to access meaning in the text. And I've got it down to I can do a whole class in probably 30, 35 minutes now. And I can do that and I encourage class teachers to do it, and I'll teach the class, which is the best thing to do. But it's a really useful tool because it tells me whether they think the book's too hard for them and then they'll need help. They might need one-to-one, tier 1 support to be able to access meaning in that text. So in the report, they state that running records are aligned with whole language. Well, they are if you're using a level text like PM readers, because you used a running record to put a kid on a level, because level text are found upon in the report. Okay, so it's true what they said, but there are other uses of this strategy. That was my point. And I just felt strongly enough about it to write to Jordana about it. Also, it was said in the report they don't provide useful information about where to next for students, and they test reading progress through level text. But it doesn't have to only be that. I think that's a very narrow view, which prompted me to respond, as you can see. So I received it. Yes.
I was going to say, it does make you question, you know, how much of a teacherly background these researchers have.
We don't know. I don't know that information, and I didn't think to ask, or I would have. I received a response to the email from Amy Haywood, and Amy is the 3rd author for this report. She acknowledged that curriculum-based assessments were not addressed in the report and referred us to an earlier report, 2022, which is a story for another day for you and I to talk about. But I did not get any response, re the narrow view of using learning records outlined in the report under discussion today. So I felt that I wasn't given a hearing based on what I was saying. Yeah, although Amy tried to answer my question, I suppose. And my issue is, and I see it with teachers every day, we have a new English curriculum. Teachers need to teach it. It's mandatory. You have to do it. Although the big six, the effective pillars of reading instruction, are evidenced in the syllabus clearly, the report goes a step further in its recommendations, and I felt some tension aligning the two while reading through the call to action. That was how I felt in the heart.
Okay, so here are some recommendations around what good professional learning should look like in this particular area, teaching students how to read. Lots of shoulds here, I noticed, Lorri. High medallion.
Yes, there are.
That's the essence of the report generally, isn't it?
Yes.
Across the education system, these things should be happening and they're not. That's the whole point.
And these are some pictures of some of our courses we did last year, aren't they? Which is lovely,
Yeah.
lovely memories. And I swim every day, and there's a teacher who lives around me, and she swims, she works part-time. And I said, how did it go when you went back to work teaching your integrated English unit? She was so keen when we met her at the course. And she said, well, I went back to school so keen to implement an integrated unit in English that addressed our scope and sequence, blah, blah, blah. And she said the executive who didn't attend the professional learning, they said we all have to teach such and such a book. And she was shut down. So in terms of these guidelines for professional learning, there's a couple of things that we need to learn. First of all, the executive have to be on side. There's no point in sending the people to PL if the executive don't support them back at the school with what they learned. And I felt for Michelle because she was so keen to implement what she'd learned and she didn't have the opportunity. So in terms of some of these comments about professional learning, certainly can improve the quality of teaching, and high quality teaching improves student learning quite clearly. It should have a demonstrated value for teachers, so it should be linked to the curriculum, should be aligned to school priorities, yes. It should be supported by the school leadership. There's no point trying to implement something if you haven't got the executive on board, or it could be your literacy teacher, your specialist teacher, you know, if you have one of those in your school. So it should also come with useful resources so teachers can immediately apply their new knowledge and skills. So it has to be doable and not complicated. So I'm glad that it was addressed, the professional learning, but I just think it's so important that it was worth us unpacking a little bit more what they said in the report.
Sure.
Did you want to say anything else about that?
No, I think you've covered it well, Lorri.
So it was really a waste of Michelle's day to come to our course, wasn't it?
Okay, yeah.
It's very sad.
Well, it is sad, but I guess what do teachers do in that situation? They've got to, in the leadership vacuum, they really have to step up. I mean, if it's going to make a difference to their kids and their learning, they have to get together and just somehow try and work out the best way to operate.
That's right, because they've got that local knowledge about their workplace, haven't they? We don't have that.
Yeah.
So what about some big picture ideas, take-home messages, Michael?
Yeah, well, look, we've certainly, outlined, I guess, some of the main ideas from this report. Is there anything else, Lorri, that you'd like to mention?
Yes, there's a few other random ideas that came through that we've not elaborated on that I think are important to mention today. The proposal of the master teachers and also micro-credentialing teachers and aides in evidence-based literacy teaching with accompanying financial incentives. This is an interesting idea. Do a course, be micro-credentialed on literacy teaching, what the science of reading says, and then implement that in your practice. And if you do that, you get a financial incentive, not just for teachers, your aides can do that as well. So that's an interesting idea.
Yeah. That whole question of incentives is a little bit controversial at the moment, isn't it? The idea of rewarding teachers for their results. I mean, how else can you know whether teachers have actually had an impact by looking at the results? But if you do see improvements, who's responsible for that? Who should get the reward? the classroom teacher, the instructional leader, the teacher's aide, last year's teacher. Lots of people
Principal. That's right.
have an input into, the performance of every student in the school.
And the principal might think that they had an impact because they directed the direction of the teaching in the school as well.
Hopefully they are. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. In
Yeah.
terms of instructional leadership.
Yeah.
But we can agree that NAPLAN Year 3, even though it's earlier this year, is much too late to start identifying gaps.
Yes, that's right. Mandating the Year 1 phonics screen will give data early in Year 1, and the need for a kinder screener is also recommended to identify those students who need to help with decoding.
And the report says do it regularly. And I know in my system we have a screener before students start school, but it's not something you can compare across schools in terms of the data.
Sure.
But the accountability factor too, Michael, was strong throughout the report. A call to strengthen school reviews to determine student achievement, curriculum implementation, and school instructional approaches to reading. These would ensure alignment between planned, taught, and learned curriculum.
It'll be interesting to see what recommendations the Australian government will adopt. What an important, interesting discussion for schools and systems to be taking.
That's right. And that's what we said at the beginning, so we've come full circle, haven't we?
We have.
But finally, I wanted to say that the report claims that teachers overestimate their knowledge about phonics. It provides robust evidence on how to teach reading. The co-authors ask us to take the reading science seriously, which we're all interested in doing. They advocate for all schools to teach reading according to the evidence, which we all need to know about.
Yeah.
I thought that was the main message.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. And a good note to finish on, Lorri. I've learned so much today. Thank you very much.
I have too. All the best. Thank you, and good luck, everybody.
Bye, everyone.